The auctioneer's voice, a gravelly rasp accustomed to hawking cattle and foreclosed dreams, cut through the shimmering heat of Redemption Gulch. And now, folks, a special lot. Young, willing, and with a strong back, despite her affliction, he gestured towards the small, trembling figure on the rickety platform. Ilara. Her eyes, wide and the color of a stormy sky, darted across the leering faces in the crowd, uncomprehending the words but feeling the oppressive weight of their stares. She clutched a worn rag doll, its button eyes seeming to absorb her terror. Her father, a man hollowed out by grief and bad whiskey, stood beside the auctioneer, his face a mask of shame, avoiding her gaze. He'd already made his deal. Silas Blackwood, a man whose shadow seemed to carry its own chill, leaned against a support post of the livery, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. His wealth was as vast as his cruelty, his land holdings swallowing smaller ranches like a hungry python. He'd offered a prime stallion, a magnificent black beast, for the girl. A horse for a human soul. The crowd murmured, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and the grim acceptance of harsh frontier bargains. Ilara couldn't hear their whispers, her world a silent film of menacing expressions and suffocating heat. She only saw her father nod, a jerky, final movement. Blackwood pushed himself off the post, his hand reaching for the rope that loosely bound Ilara's wrists. Her small body flinched violently. From the edge of the crowd, a figure stirred. Jedediah Thorne, a man who blended with the weathered clapboard of the buildings as if carved from the same sun-bleached timber, took a slow step forward. His face was a roadmap of harsh trails and harsher memories, his eyes the color of faded denim, watchful and still. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were like stones dropped into a deep well. He'd come to Redemption Gulch for supplies, not for a spectacle of human degradation. Yet, something in the girl's silent terror, in the casual brutality of the transaction, snagged a rusted hook deep within him. He saw not a commodity, but a flicker of a life about to be extinguished. Blackwood's hand was inches from Ilara when Jedediah's voice, low and resonant, rumbled through the sudden hush. "I'll offer 2, all I snapped to him." The auctioneer blinked. "2 what, friend?" Jedediah's gaze was fixed on Blackwood, not the auctioneer. 2 prime geldings. Broken and sound. For the girl, Blackwood turned, his smirk twisting into a sneer. "Stay out of this, drifter. This ain't your concern." His eyes, small and predatory, raked over Jedediah. He saw a man weathered and worn, not an immediate threat in finery or posture. Jedediah didn't flinch. His hand, calloused and scarred, rested near the worn butt of the Colt Peacemaker holstered low on his hip. It wasn't a threat, merely a statement of capability. "She ain't property, Blackwood." Ilara, sensing the shift in tension, looked from Blackwood's sneering face to Jedediah's impassive one. She couldn't understand the words, but she saw the stillness in Jedediah, a stark contrast to Blackwood's bristling aggression. Her father, startled, finally looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "The deal's made," Blackwood growled, taking another step towards Ilara. Jedediah moved then, not fast, but with an undeniable finality, placing himself between Blackwood and the girl. He was taller than Blackwood, broader in the shoulders, a silent bulwark. "The deal ain't settled till the goods change hands. My offer stands. 2 geldings. Better than that 1 stallion, for any man who knows horseflesh." He looked at Ilara's father. "Your choice." The father, caught between Blackwood's fury and this stranger's quiet intensity, hesitated. The crowd held its breath. Blackwood's face purpled. "You'll regret this, farmer, if you renege. And you," he jabbed a finger at Jedediah, "you'll regret it more." Jedediah's eyes didn't waver. He simply waited. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Finally, the father, with a choked sob, mumbled, the geldings." "I'll take the geldings." Blackwood looked like he might explode, but the cold certainty in Jedediah's eyes, the way his hand hadn't moved from his side but seemed an extension of his will, gave him pause. He was a bully, not a fool. He knew when a man meant business, even if he didn't understand why. "You've made an enemy today, stranger," Blackwood spat, his voice venomous. "A powerful one." Jedediah didn't reply. He reached out slowly, his calloused fingers gently untying the rope from Ilara's wrists. She flinched but didn't pull away, her wide, frightened eyes fixed on his face. He offered her a hand. After a moment's hesitation, her small, trembling fingers touched his. He led her away from the platform, away from Blackwood's burning stare and the stunned silence of the crowd, the magnificent black stallion forgotten, the price of a soul reconsidered. The dust swirled around their feet as they walked towards the edge of town, a retired bounty hunter and a deaf girl, bound by a transaction that had little to do with horses and everything to do with a flicker of humanity in a heart long thought barren. What would you do if you saw a child bartered away like property? Would you stand by, or would you step in, even if it cost you everything? Tell me in the comments. The ride to Jedediah's cabin was a silent affair, punctuated only by the rhythmic creak of saddle leather and the soft thud of hooves on the parched earth. Ilara rode in front of him, perched precariously on his saddle, her small frame rigid with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Jedediah kept a steadying arm around her, his touch impersonal yet strangely reassuring. His cabin was nestled deep in a sparsely wooded canyon, miles from any semblance of civilization, a solitary sentinel against the vast, indifferent landscape. It was small, utilitarian, built by his own hands, a place of deliberate isolation. As he dismounted and gently lifted her down, Ilara's eyes scanned the rough-hewn logs, the single stone chimney trickling a faint wisp of smoke, the untamed wilderness pressing in on all sides. Her fear, momentarily held at bay by the shock of her rescue, returned with a suffocating intensity. This man was a stranger, his face hard, his silence unnerving. Inside, the cabin was Spartan. A narrow cot, a rough table and 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and shelves holding a few essential provisions. It was clean, meticulously so, but devoid of any softness, any touch of home. Jedediah moved with an economy of motion, stoking the fire, filling a kettle with water from a bucket. He was acutely aware of the child's terror, the way she huddled near the door, her gaze darting towards the latch as if contemplating escape into the unforgiving wilderness. He wasn't used to this. His life had been one of solitude or the grim company of men on the run. Caring for someone, especially a child so clearly traumatized, was a language he'd long forgotten, if he'd ever truly known it. He poured some warm water into a basin, found a relatively clean rag, and gestured towards it, then towards her face, smudged with dust and tears. Ilara stared, uncomprehending. He tried again, pointing to his own face, then making a washing motion. A tiny flicker of understanding crossed her features. Hesitantly, she approached the basin. He set out some dried jerky and a piece of hardtack on the table, then retreated to the far side of the room, giving her space. He watched her surreptitiously as she nibbled at the food, her movements bird-like and wary. The silence in the cabin was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Ilara's soft, infrequent breaths. He tried a smile, it felt alien on his face, probably looked more like a grimace. She didn't respond, her eyes remaining wide and watchful. He remembered a few crude signs he'd seen trappers use with native tribes. He pointed to himself. Jedediah, he mouthed slowly, tapping his chest. She just stared. This was harder than tracking a fugitive across 3 territories. That night, he gave her the cot, rolling himself in a blanket on the hard floor near the hearth. He lay awake for a long time, listening to her fitful stirring, the ghost of a small, warm body so close a painful echo of a life he'd buried deep. Images flickered behind his closed eyelids, a woman's laughter, the tiny hand of a child clutching his finger, then smoke, and fire, and a silence more profound than any deafness. He gritted his teeth, pushing the memories back into their vault. In the days that followed, a fragile routine began to form. Jedediah would hunt or tend to his small garden, Ilara watching him from the doorway, always silent, always alert. He learned that her deafness was profound, no sound, no matter how loud, registered. Her communication was in her eyes, in the subtle shifts of her expression, in the way her hands moved, sometimes sketching shapes in the air, a language he strained to understand. He started leaving a piece of charcoal and a smooth piece of bark on the table. One morning, he found a crude drawing of a horse, then a flower, then a stick figure with wide, frightened eyes at her. He drew a rough outline of the cabin, then himself, pointing to it, then to her. A small, almost imperceptible nod was her reply. He realized she was intelligent, observant, her mind sharp despite the silence that enveloped her. He took her into the nearby town of Havenwood for supplies, a small, dusty settlement less overtly hostile than Redemption Gulch. Martha, the storekeeper's wife, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, was the first to show Elara open warmth. "Well now, Jedediah Thorne, who is this little sprite?" she'd asked, her voice soft. Jedediah, uncharacteristically flustered, mumbled something about guardianship. Martha, perceptive and kind, didn't press. Instead, she offered Elara a piece of horehound candy. Elara looked at Jedediah, seeking permission. He nodded. The small, sweet taste brought the faintest hint of a smile to her lips, a fleeting sunrise. Martha, noticing Elara didn't respond to her voice but followed her gestures keenly, began to use simple, exaggerated motions. She showed Elara a brightly colored quilt, pointing to the different animals stitched into it. Elara's fingers traced a yellow chick, her expression softening. But the shadow of Silas Blackwood loomed. Jedediah knew men like Blackwood. Their pride was a fragile, venomous thing. The humiliation in Redemption Gulch wouldn't be forgotten. He found tracks near the canyon rim one morning, too deliberate for a stray animal. Someone was watching. His senses, honed by years of survival, prickled with unease. He began to check his colt more frequently, his gaze sweeping the tree line with renewed vigilance. The peace he'd sought in his isolation was proving as elusive as the ghosts of his past. He was no longer just protecting himself, he was protecting her, this silent, watchful child who was slowly, tentatively, beginning to fill the echoing emptiness of his existence. The slow thaw in Elara's demeanor was like watching a desert bloom after a rare rain. It began with small things. She stopped flinching every time Jedediah moved suddenly. She started to meet his gaze more readily, her stormy blue eyes holding a nascent trust. One afternoon, while he was mending a bridle, she approached him, holding out the piece of charcoal and bark. She drew a crude flower, then pointed outside towards a patch of stubborn Indian paintbrush clinging to the rocky soil. Then, hesitantly, she touched her chest and made a small, graceful gesture with her hand at the sign he didn't understand, but the intent was clear. She was sharing something with him, a piece of her silent world. Jedediah felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, an unfamiliar sensation. He nodded, then took the charcoal and drew a rough likeness of his horse, then patted its neck. Elara watched, absorbed. He realized then that her silence was not emptiness, but a different kind of perception. Her eyes missed nothing, the way a hawk circled overhead, the subtle shift in the wind through the pines, the tension in his shoulders when he thought she wasn't looking. She began to anticipate his needs, having water ready when he came in from chopping wood, or pointing to a tool he was about to reach for. Their communication evolved into a unique pigeon of gestures, drawings, and shared understanding. He learned that a tap on her heart meant good or happy, a rapid shaking of her hands meant a no or a danger. He taught her to identify animal tracks, to spot edible berries, the quiet law of the wilderness that had been his only companion for so long. He found himself speaking to her, his voice rusty from disuse, narrating his actions even though he knew she couldn't hear the words. It was the act of speaking, of sharing, that mattered. "This here is a deer track, see the 2 toes. Fresh, too," he'd point, and she'd examine it with an intensity that shamed his own sometimes jaded observations. The townsfolk in Havenwood remained wary of Jedediah, the quiet man with the haunted eyes and the silent child. But Martha, the storekeeper's wife, continued her gentle overtures. She gave Elara scraps of colored fabric, and soon Elara was meticulously trying to stitch them onto her rag doll, her small brow furrowed in concentration. Martha even showed Jedediah a dog-eared pamphlet with illustrations of basic hand signs used by some mission schools for the deaf. "Might help, Jedediah." "She's a bright little thing." He took it, grudgingly at first, then studied it by the firelight each night, his lips moving silently as he practiced the unfamiliar shapes. The first time he successfully signed a water and Elara's face lit up with comprehension, a genuine smile gracing her lips, he felt a jolt akin to a victory. but the idyllic interlude was fragile. One evening, as dusk painted the canyon walls in hues of purple and blood orange, Jedediah returned from checking his snares to find Elara agitated. She was pointing frantically towards the tree line, her eyes wide with fear, making the sign for man, a finger tracing a mustache and beard he'd shown her from the pamphlet, then a sharp, downward flick of her hand. Jedediah's blood ran cold. He scanned the trees, his hand instinctively going to his Colt. He saw nothing, but he trusted Elara's heightened senses. Someone had been close. Too close. That night, he didn't sleep on the floor. He sat in the chair by the door, his shotgun across his knees, watching the moonlit shadows dance outside the cabin window. The ghosts of his past were no longer just memories, they were taking on a present, menacing form. He thought of Blackwood, his arrogant sneer, his possessive cruelty. He knew the man wouldn't simply let the insult fade. Sheriff Brody from Havenwood rode out a few days later, a portly man with an anxious face but a core of decency. "Jedediah," he began, shifting uncomfortably in his saddle, "been some talk. Blackwood's been marking a noise in Redemption Gulch. Says you stole something of his." Jedediah's eyes were like chips of ice. "Elara ain't a thing, Sheriff." "And she weren't his." I know, Brody said hastily, holding up a hand. "But Blackwood's got influence. Money. He's stirring up trouble. Says you're a dangerous man, a kidnapper. Folks are getting edgy." "Let 'em," Jedediah said, his voice flat. "Just came to warn you. Watch your back. Blackwood's not the type to forgive or forget." Brody's gaze fell on Elara, who was watching them from the cabin doorway, her small hand clutching Jedediah's trouser leg. A look of sympathy softened the sheriff's worried features. "She seems all right with you." "She is," Jedediah affirmed, his tone leaving no room for doubt. As Brody rode off, Jedediah knew the fragile peace was shattered. The confrontation was no longer a possibility, but an inevitability. He looked at Elara, at the trust in her eyes, a trust he hadn't earned but was fiercely determined to keep. He thought of his own daughter, lost to him years ago in a storm of violence and fire, a consequence of his former life. A life he thought he had outrun. The pain, always simmering beneath the surface, flared anew. He wouldn't fail again. He couldn't. He looked down at the old, scarred bounty hunter's star he kept wrapped in oilcloth, hidden away in his thil bag. A relic of a past he despised, yet a reminder of the skills he possessed. Skills he might need again, not for coin, but for something far more precious. If you were Jedediah, faced with a powerful enemy and a past that refuses to stay buried, how would you prepare to protect the innocent soul in your care? Would you run, or would you stand your ground? Let us know your thoughts. The air in the canyon grew heavy, charged with unspoken menace. Jedediah felt it in the unnatural stillness of the birds, in the way the wind whispered warnings through the pines. He began to fortify the cabin, subtly at first, then with more urgency. He reinforced the door, checked the hinges on the shutters, and strategically placed caches of ammunition. He taught Elara a simple emergency signal, 3 sharp raps on the floorboards if she saw anyone approaching while he was outside. He showed her a hiding spot, a small, cleverly concealed cellar beneath a loose floorboard, stocked with a little water and dried food. Her eyes were solemn as she absorbed his instructions, understanding the gravity without needing words. One afternoon, while Jedediah was splitting logs, his back to the dense woods bordering his small clearing, Elara, who was practicing her letters on a piece of slate near the cabin steps, suddenly froze. Her head snapped up, her eyes fixed on a point in the trees. She didn't make a sound, but her entire body went rigid with alarm. She scrambled to her feet, her slate clattering to the ground, and raced towards Jedediah, her small hands beating frantically against his leg. He whirled around, axe still in hand, following her terrified gaze. For a moment, he saw nothing but the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. Then, a glint of metal, a rifle barrel, quickly withdrawn. They weren't just being watched anymore. They were being stalked. That night, the attack came. The moon was a sliver, offering little light, the darkness a shroud. Jedediah had bedded Elara down in the cellar, his heart a cold knot of dread. He sat in his usual chair, shotgun ready, every nerve ending screaming. The first sound was a soft thud against the far wall, followed by the splintering of wood as a heavy object smashed through a shuttered window. Then, a chorus of menacing shouts. "Thorn! We know you're in there. Send out the girl, and Blackwood might let you live." It was the voice of one of Blackwood's foremen, a brute named Cletus. Jedediah didn't answer. He waited, listening, judging their positions. A fiery torch arched through the broken window, landing on the packed earth floor, sputtering and casting flickering, demonic shadows. More shouts, more demands. He saw movement at another window, a silhouette raising a rifle. Jedediah fired the shotgun. The roar was deafening in the confined space, the buckshot ripping through the thin wall. A scream from outside, cut short. The assault intensified. Bullets tore through the cabin walls, thudding into logs, sending splinters flying. Jedediah moved like a phantom, using the meager cover, returning fire with deadly accuracy from his Colt. He was no longer just Jedediah Thorn, the quiet homesteader. He was the man he used to be, the man who had tracked down and faced desperate killers for a living, his movements economical, his aim true. During a brief lull in the shooting, as the attackers regrouped, Cletus's voice boomed again, laced with pain and fury. "Blackwood wants the girl, Thorn. She ain't worth dinner for." Jedediah's voice, when he finally spoke, was cold steel. "Get off my land. Or die on it." Another volley of shots answered him. He felt a searing pain in his left arm as a bullet grazed him. He gritted his teeth, ignoring it. He had to protect Ilara. That was all that mattered. Suddenly, from beneath the floorboards, came 3 sharp raps. Ilara! His heart leaped into his throat. What had she seen? He risked a glance towards the cellar entrance. Just then, a section of the roof near the chimney, weakened by the gunfire, began to smolder, then burst into flame as another torch landed true. Smoke started to fill the cabin. He heard a different sound from outside, towards the back of the cabin, the scrape of boots on rock, the click of a rifle bolt. They were trying to flank him, get to the cellar entrance which was partially exposed at the rear foundation. It was then, as he turned to face this new threat, that a bullet struck the locket he always wore beneath his shirt. The impact threw him back, the chain snapping, the silver locket clattering to the floor. It sprang open, revealing the faded tintype inside, a smiling woman with kind eyes and a little girl with pigtails, her arm linked through her mother's. His Sarah. His Lily. Lost in a fire set by vengeful outlaws years ago, a fire he couldn't stop, a family he couldn't save. The sight, illuminated by the growing flames in the cabin, struck him with the force of a physical blow. The agony, the guilt, the reason he had buried himself in this wilderness, all surged to the surface. He wasn't just fighting for Ilara, he was fighting the ghosts of his own failure. With a roar that was more animal than human, Jedediah surged to his feet, ignoring the smoke and the flames licking at the walls. He kicked open the front door, stepping out into the moon-dappled clearing, 2 Colts now appearing in his hands as if by magic. "Blackwood," he bellowed, his voice raw with grief and fury. "You want a fight? You got one." The remaining attackers, startled by his sudden appearance and the sheer ferocity in his eyes, hesitated. Silas Blackwood himself, who had been lurking at the edge of the trees, stepped forward, a cruel smile on his face. "Finally decided to die like a man, Thorn." But before Blackwood could say more, a small figure darted from the side of the burning cabin. It was Ilara. She must have found another way out of the cellar when she heard the fighting move towards its entrance. In her hand, she clutched Jedediah's fallen locket. She ran towards him, her face streaked with soot and terror, but her eyes fixed on his with fierce determination. She held out the locket, thrusting it into his hand, then pointed frantically behind Blackwood, towards a figure creeping up on him from the shadows with a raised knife. Jedediah's eyes met Ilara's. In that instant, he saw not just her warning, but her courage, her unwavering loyalty. The past and the present collided. He spun, firing almost without aiming. The man with the knife screamed and fell. Blackwood, momentarily distracted, raised his own pistol, but Jedediah was faster. His second shot caught Blackwood in the shoulder, sending the gun flying. Blackwood staggered back, howling in pain and surprise. The fight was far from over, but in that moment, with the locket clutched in his hand and Elara safe at his side, Jedediah knew he wouldn't let the fire win this time. The crackle of the burning cabin underscored the sudden, tense silence in the clearing. Blackwood clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of disbelief and agony. His remaining men, seeing their leader wounded and Thorn still standing like an avenging angel amidst the chaos, lost their nerve. Two of them turned and fled into the darkness, the sounds of their panicked retreat fading into the night. Cletus, the foreman, lay groaning near the broken window, his leg shattered by Jedediah's earlier shotgun blast. Jedediah kept his Colt trained on Blackwood, his chest heaving, smoke stinging his eyes. Elara clung to his leg, her small body trembling, but her eyes never left his face. He gently pushed her behind him, shielding her. "It's over, Blackwood," Jedediah said, his voice raspy. "Get your man and go. Don't ever come back." Blackwood, his arrogance deflated, glared with pure hatred. This isn't finished, Thorn. You'll pay for this." But his threat lacked conviction. He was beaten. With a grunt of pain, he gestured to his one remaining, terrified henchman to help Cletus. As they stumbled away, supporting the moaning foreman, the sound of approaching horses grew louder. Sheriff Brody, flanked by a small posse of grim-faced townsmen from Havenwood, rode into the clearing, their expressions hardening as they took in the scene, the burning cabin, the wounded men retreating, Jedediah standing firm with the child. Brody dismounted, his shotgun held ready. "Jedediah! What in blazes happened here?" Jedediah slowly lowered his pistol, though he didn't holster it. "Blackwood happened, Sheriff. He came for the girl. Came to kill us both." He gestured to the bullet-riddled walls, the flames now consuming what was left of his home. Elara, seeing the sheriff, peeked out from behind Jedediah. She held up the locket, its silver surface blackened by soot, and pointed from it to Jedediah, then patted her own chest with the sign for good. Brody's gaze softened as he looked at the child, then back at Jedediah, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. He'd heard whispers of Thorn's past, vague rumors of a tragedy, a lost family. The open locket, the child's fierce loyalty, it painted a clearer picture than any rumor. One of the townsmen, a blacksmith named Peterson whose own daughter was Elara's age, stepped forward. "We saw Blackwood's men riding this way, Sheriff. Figured they were up to no good after all the threats he's been marking." Brody nodded. He looked at the retreating figures of Blackwood and his men. "They won't get far. Especially not with Blackwood wounded." He turned to Jedediah. "Your cabin's lost." Jedediah looked at the inferno that had been his refuge, then down at Elara. He felt a pang, not for the lost structure, but for the sanctuary it had briefly offered. But as he looked at Elara, her small hand now confidently gripping his, he knew his true refuge was standing beside him. "It's just wood, Sheriff," he said, his voice quiet. "We're alive." Martha, the storekeeper's wife, had insisted on coming with the posse. She rushed forward now, her face etched with concern, and gently drew Elara into a comforting embrace. Elara, surprisingly, leaned into her, the tension finally leaving her small frame. Martha looked at Jedediah, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You saved her, Jedediah. You truly did." The fire cast long, dancing shadows, illuminating the faces of the Havenwood citizens. The fear and suspicion that had once clouded their expressions when they looked at Jedediah were replaced by respect and a dawning understanding. They had seen the monster in Silas Blackwood, and the quiet heroism in the haunted man who had stood against him. As the flames died down to smoldering embers against the approaching dawn, Sheriff Brody made his decision. "Blackwood will answer for this," he declared, his voice firm. "Attempted murder, arson. He's gone too far. His money won't save him this time." He looked at Jedediah. "You and the girl, you'll come back to Havenwood with us. You're welcome there. Folks will help you rebuild." Jedediah looked at Elara, who was now sleepily leaning against Martha, the terror replaced by exhaustion. He felt the weight of the locket in his hand. He hadn't saved his Sarah or his Lily. But tonight, he had saved Ilara. And in doing so, a part of him, long dead and buried, had begun to stir back to life. The redemption he never thought possible felt almost within reach, not as an erasure of his past, but as a new path forward, illuminated by the unwavering trust in a silent child's eyes. The sun began to crest the canyon rim, painting the sky with hues of hope. Jedediah Thorne, the retired bounty hunter, stood amidst the ruins of his isolated past, no longer truly alone. He had faced his demons, both old and new, and for the first time in many years, he looked towards the future not with dread, but with a quiet, burgeoning sense of purpose. Jedediah found his redemption in the heart of innocence. What does redemption mean to you? Click here for another story of courage in the unforgiving West, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales that stir the soul.